You said yes again. You knew, even as you were saying it, that you didn't want to. And now you're sitting with the familiar weight of having given something away that you needed for yourself. In the early years of the 20th century, a young Indian lawyer named Mohandas Gandhi was developing what would become one of the most influential ethical frameworks of the modern world. He was working out the philosophy of ahimsa, non-violence, non-harm, and what it actually required in practice. Most people who encountered the concept understood it as passivity, as yielding, as the refusal to impose, as saying yes when asked, accommodating when pressured, absorbing rather than resisting. Gandhi understood it as something entirely different. He had arrived at this understanding, not through theory, but through experience, through years of watching people perform sacrifice while consuming themselves, perform generosity while breeding resentment, perform selflessness while becoming, quietly and without intending to, the most difficult person in the room. He wrote in a letter in 1920 that a man who allows himself to be coerced out of weakness or fear is not practicing ahimsa. He is practicing a kind of dishonesty, a submission that looks like peace, but contains no peace at all. True ahimsa, he argued, required first the capacity for violence, the actual ability to resist, to refuse, to push back, and then the conscious, deliberate choice not to use it. The no had to be available before the yes meant anything. Without the no, the yes is not generosity. It is the absence of a choice, and the absence of a choice is not the same as love. He described a man standing on a river bank, watching someone drowning. If the man cannot swim, and he throws himself into the river anyway, he does not save the drowning person. He creates two people in need of rescue. The act looks like selflessness. It produces the opposite of its intention. Gandhi was not making a case for self-preservation as a virtue. He was making a case for something more specific, that genuine care for others requires first a clear-eyed accounting of what you actually have to give, not what you wish you had, not what you feel you should have, what you actually have. Buddhism had been making the same argument for 2,000 years before Gandhi put it in a letter, and it had a name for the confusion that Gandhi was trying to correct. It called it idiot compassion, the compassion that looks generous from the outside and functions as self-abandonment from the inside. The confusion between saying yes and actually helping. Think about the last time you said yes to something when every part of you wanted to say no. Not a big thing, necessarily. It might have been a request that arrived when you were already exhausted, a favor, an extra responsibility, someone needing something from you. At the exact moment you had nothing left to give, and you said yes anyway. Maybe because the person asking looked like they needed it. Maybe because saying no felt selfish, and you have a long and complicated relationship with feeling selfish. Maybe because you could already see the disappointment on their face before they'd even had it, and disappointing people is a feeling you have spent years organizing your life to avoid, maybe because the silence after a no is a kind of silence you have never learned to sit with comfortably. So you said yes, and even as you said it, something in you went slightly flat. You know that feeling. It lives in the chest, somewhere between the sternum and the throat, a kind of hollowing, the specific tiredness of having given something away. Before you could stop yourself, the days after that, yes, you were probably slightly less present than usual, slightly shorter in the conversations that mattered, slightly less available to the people who had a legitimate claim on your attention, not because you were busy, but because the yes had come from somewhere that was already running low. And here is what almost nobody says out loud: that yes cost someone else too. Not in the obvious way, not in the way where they saw the cost, but in the quiet, aggregate way where a person who consistently overextends gradually becomes less present, less genuine, less able to give the thing that was actually being asked for, which was never the task itself, but the quality of presence that would have made the task worth something. You can say yes to everything and give nothing of consequence. You can say no to most things and give something that lasts. The distinction between those two is not a time management question. It is a question about what you are actually made of and whether the way you spend yourself corresponds at all to what matters. Buddhism has been sitting with this question longer than most. The word metta is usually translated as loving kindness, but the translation misses something important about where the practice begins. The traditional metta meditation, the formal practice that has been taught in Buddhist monasteries and lay communities for over 2,000 years, does not begin with another person. It begins with yourself. The practitioner is asked to hold themselves in mind and offer to themselves the same wish they would eventually extend to others. May I be happy. May I be well. May I be free from suffering. May I live with ease. This is not narcissism. This is not self-absorption. This is the recognition, embedded in the structure of the practice itself, that you cannot genuinely offer what you have not genuinely received, that the loving kindness you extend outward must come from somewhere, and that somewhere is not a bottomless well. It is a specific, finite, replenishable resource that requires tending. The Buddha was explicit about this in a way that tends to get lost in the popular understanding of Buddhist compassion. He taught that the practitioner should extend metta first to themselves, then to those they love, then to neutral persons, then to difficult people, then to all beings. The sequence is not arbitrary. You cannot sincerely wish for the well-being of someone you find genuinely difficult if you are running on empty. You will perform the wish. You will say the words. But the actual quality of attention that makes metta a practice rather than a recitation, the real turning of the mind toward another's well-being, requires something from you, and that something must exist first. There is a Pali term for what happens when this sequence gets reversed, when compassion flows outward without a stable internal foundation. karuna without upekkha, compassion without equanimity, compassion that is moved by suffering in a way that is not grounded, that absorbs the distress of others into your own nervous system, that loses the distinction between their pain and your pain, that becomes so entangled in another person's difficulty that you are no longer able to help them because you have become, functionally, another person drowning. This is not weakness. This is what happens to genuinely caring people who were never given permission to include themselves in the circle of their own care. The psychologist Christine Neff, whose research on self-compassion has spent 2 decades arriving at the same place. Buddhist practice arrived thousands of years ago, documented what she called the caregiving trap, the pattern where people who are highly empathic, highly responsive to others' needs, highly committed to being present for the people they love, end up chronically depleted, not because they care too much, but because they have internalized the belief that including themselves in their own compassion is somehow a betrayal of it. That self-care is selfishness. That needs are demands. That the right response to your own depletion is to push through it. That self-care is selfishness. That needs are demands. That the right response to your own depletion is to push through it. Buddhism names this confusion clearly. The belief that you must empty yourself to genuinely love others is not compassion. It is a misunderstanding of what compassion requires. The lamp that has run out of oil does not illuminate anything. It is simply dark. And here is the thing about darkness that is easy to miss. A lamp that has gone out does not know it has gone out. It is still warm. It still looks like a lamp. It still occupies the place where the light used to be. The people around it may not immediately notice that what they're getting from it is no longer light, just the residual warmth of something that used to burn. This is what chronic depletion looks like. From the inside, you are still there. You are still saying yes. You are still performing the gestures of care, but the quality of presence that made those gestures meaningful, the actual light, has quietly gone out. And because it went out gradually, neither you nor the people around you may have noticed exactly when. The Tibetan teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, whose ideas we encountered earlier in this series, in the context of idiot compassion, made a distinction that is worth sitting with carefully. He described 2 kinds of no. The first kind is the no of fear, the no that comes from a place of self-protection that is rooted in anxiety about what will happen if you give more than you have, that carries a quality of defensiveness and sometimes of resentment. This kind of no is understandable. It is what people learn to say when they have been taken from for a long time and have no other mechanism available. But it is not the no that Buddhism is pointing at. The second kind of no is what Trungpa called compassionate refusal, the no that comes from clarity rather than fear, the no that arises from a genuine assessment of what is actually helpful here, not what feels like helpfulness Not what will be received as generosity, but what will actually serve the situation and the person in the long run. A parent who does everything for their child because they cannot bear to watch the child struggle is not practicing compassionate love. They are practicing a kind of love that makes itself indispensable by preventing the child from developing the capacity to not need it. A friend who always says yes to every request for emotional support, who is always available, who absorbs everything without limit, is not practicing metta. They are practicing something that looks like metta from the outside and functions, over time, as an implicit contract. I will have no needs of my own. If you will need me. This is not a small distinction. The no that comes from genuine self-knowledge, the no that says, I cannot do this well right now, and doing it badly would not serve you, is an act of respect for the person being declined. It treats them as someone who deserves genuine presence, overperformed availability. It says, you are worth more than what I can offer. When I am running on empty, that no is harder to say than yes. It requires knowing what you actually have. It requires tolerating the discomfort of disappointing someone in the short term for the sake of something more real in the long term. And it requires believing, which is the part most people find hardest, that your own depletion is a legitimate consideration, that you matter enough to be included in the accounting. The Buddha's teaching on this is contained in a passage from the Majjhima Nikaya that is often quoted in meditation circles, but rarely applied to ordinary relationships. He compares the mind to a lamp that has run out of oil, he says, does not help anyone, not the people who need light, not itself. The lamp's purpose is to give light, but it can only give light if it has been tended to, if the oil has been replenished, if the wick has been maintained, if the conditions that allow it to burn have been attended to with care. The tending of the lamp is not a distraction from its purpose. It is the prerequisite of its purpose. You are the lamp. The no that protects your oil is not selfishness. It is the act that makes the light possible. There is a specific moment that most people who struggle with saying no have experienced many times, but rarely examined closely. It is the moment after you have said yes to something you didn't have, not the moment of saying yes. That moment has its own quality, a kind of relief mixed with dread. The moment after, when you are driving home, or lying in bed, or sitting in the middle of whatever you agreed to do, and you can feel very clearly that you are performing care rather than giving it, that the thing you are doing has the shape of help, but not its substance, that you are present in the room, but not quite present to the person, and you keep going because, having said yes, stopping now seems worse. That moment, the performance of presence, is what Trungpa was pointing at when he described idiot compassion, not malice, not indifference, the good-hearted, depleted attempt to give something that isn't there to give. The no that prevents that moment is not a withdrawal of care. It is the most honest form of care available. The form that says, I cannot give you what you need right now, and giving you something less would not be giving you anything real. There is something that needs to be said plainly here, because most conversations about boundaries skip it in favor of a more comfortable conclusion. Saying no is going to cost you something. Not once, consistently. There will be people who experience your no as a withdrawal of love, because in their model of how love works, availability and love are the same thing. There will be relationships where the implicit contract has been that you would always say yes, and your decision to change. That contract will be experienced as a rupture, a betrayal, a signal that something has changed between you. Some of those relationships will not survive the introduction of a genuine no. Not because the no was wrong, but because the relationship was built on a foundation of your unlimited availability, and the foundation cannot hold. Once you remove what it was built on, this is not a reason not to change. It is an honest account of what the change costs. There is also this: the no that comes from self-awareness is not always clean. Sometimes you will say no from clarity and still feel guilty. Sometimes you will set a limit and lie awake wondering whether you were right to. Sometimes the person you declined will suffer in a way that you will witness, and the witnessing will be painful, even when the no was correct. Buddhism does not promise that the right action is also the comfortable action. It promises that the right action is the one that arises from clear seeing, from an honest accounting of what you have, what the situation requires, and what actually serves the long-term well-being of everyone involved, including you. That clarity is hard to maintain. It requires the kind of practice that most people associate with meditation cushions, but that actually lives in the ordinary moments. The moment before you answer the message, the moment of hesitation, before you agree, the pause in which you might ask yourself, is this coming from fullness or from fear? From genuine care or from the need to be seen as someone who always cares? Those are different motivations, and they lead to different outcomes. There is something that needs to be said plainly here, because most conversations about boundaries skip it in favor of a more comfortable conclusion. Saying no is going to cost you something. Not once, consistently. There will be people who experience your no as a withdrawal of love, because in their model of how love works, availability and love are the same thing. There will be relationships where the implicit contract has been that you would always say yes, and your decision to change that contract will be experienced as a rupture, a betrayal, a signal that something has changed between you. Some of those relationships will not survive the introduction of a genuine no, not because the no was wrong, but because the relationship was built on a foundation of your unlimited availability, and the foundation cannot hold once you remove what it was built on. This is not a reason not to change. It is an honest account of what the change costs. There is also this: The no that comes from self-awareness is not always clean. Sometimes you will say no from clarity and still feel guilty. Sometimes you will set a limit and lie awake wondering whether you were right to. Sometimes the person you declined will suffer in a way that you will witness, and the witnessing will be painful, even when the no was correct. Buddhism does not promise that the right action is also the comfortable action. It promises that the right action is the one that arises from clear seeing, from an honest accounting of what you have, what the situation requires, and what actually serves the long-term well-being of everyone involved, including you. That clarity is hard to maintain. It requires the kind of practice that most people associate with meditation cushions, but that actually lives in the ordinary moments. The moment before you answer the message, the moment of hesitation, before you agree, the pause in which you might ask yourself, is this coming from fullness or from fear? From genuine care or from the need to be seen as someone who always cares? Those are different motivations, and they lead to different outcomes. The one thing I'd like to leave you with is not a commitment to say no more often. It is something smaller than that. The next time a request arrives, the next time someone needs something from you, and you feel the familiar pull toward yes before you've even considered it, pause for 3 seconds, not to refuse, just to ask honestly, is this coming from what I have, or is it coming from what I'm afraid will happen? If I don't give it, you don't have to answer the question out loud. You don't have to change what you do. Just notice the difference between giving from fullness and giving from the fear of what it means about you if you don't, because those two things feel identical from the outside, and they are completely different on the inside. Gandhi, standing on that riverbank, watching the person in the water, the version of Gandhi who cannot swim and throws himself in anyway, is not a story about courage. It is a story about the confusion between the wish to help and the capacity to help. The version of Gandhi who knows he cannot swim, who runs for someone who can, who does the thing, and that is actually useful, rather than the thing that looks like caring. That version is the one the river remembers. Not every situation requires you to be the one who goes in. Sometimes the most useful thing you can do is stay on the bank, stay clear, stay present, stay available for the thing that only you can give, which is not everything, but which is real and which can only be given from a place that hasn't been given away. If this has landed somewhere real, somewhere you've been circling without quite finding the center, don't rush past it. The practice of including yourself in your own compassion is not a one-time decision. It is the work of a lifetime, done in the small moments before the yes arrives. Next time, we're going to reach one of the most painful places. This series has been building toward the grief of losing someone who is still alive, the loss of a relationship that ended without closure, the mourning that has no ceremony, the specific kind of grief that the world doesn't quite know what to call. That one goes somewhere. Most people haven't been willing to look. I'll see you there. And if this has been worth your time, the simplest thing you can do is stay.